Before we get into today's episode, just a quick moment because this is huge for us. The Cancer Letter podcast has been nominated for a People's Voice Webby Award. We are blown away. It's the first time we've entered. I personally was not expecting this. It's my first foray into podcasting, so we are overjoyed. If you support the show, please take just 5 seconds to vote. The link is right in the description. All right, with that aside, let's get into it. Hi, Sarah. Sorry for the giggle right away.
Instant giggle.
Yes, that's the way to go on the Sarah Jacqueyn podcast for sure.
Yeah. And it's just the joy and radiation of having just come back from vacation is just beaming off of you.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I was wondering, I just saw an SNL skit at the airport that was like Ginger's just back from vacation. Did you see that? It's like a new one, I think. And I was like, I'm worried I'm going to be that, but I don't think I've gotten too burned. I don't have my sunglass marks, I think.
Gotcha.
So
yeah. Yeah, it's a glow. It's not a sunburn.
Hell yeah, I did it. That's the goal. That's always the challenge with me whenever I interact with the sun. So, well, thank you for being here, Sarah. I will take us through last week's headlines. We had a episode of The Directors as the lead story. And we're going to talk a little bit about that because there's kind of a fun sort of behind the scenes info about it that we could dive into. But I'm not going to get into too many details, as always, because you can go and listen to the podcast itself, also on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, etc. Then we had the rest of the issue, or a big chunk of the issue, I should say, is really dedicated to early onset colorectal cancer. It was the last week of Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month last week. And we have three really strong, interesting stories about this issue that is sort of, it's now making mainstream headlines. It's coming into the public consciousness, to see a little bit of Sarah's language from her story, where, this is now the leading cause, right, of early onset cancer deaths in people under 50, so early onset. And then finally, just before we dive into sort of those two ideas, that's what we're going to be focusing on. I just wanted to definitely really give a lot of time and space, as much as I can, in the headlines about Michael Bishop, who died last week. He was a Nobel Prize-winning cancer researcher, and he really changed the entire sort of scope, field, trajectory of oncology. He, along with Harold Varmus, basically discovered that cancer is a genetic disease and that every cell in the body has the ability to become cancer. So, I mean, it's especially, now being like, starting as like a little mini cancer researcher and now covering oncology, it's weird to think of a world where that wasn't like known, but it's incredible, the work that he did. So definitely want to honor him. We have a really beautiful obituary and some really, really cool photos of him in like the 70s, I believe, with Varmus. So definitely check that out. Really beautiful, done by UCSF staff. I'm going to now sort of give it over to Sarah a little bit. I did a very poor job of alluding to sort of the fun secrets, but basically The Directors this week was Sarah's first time writing it. And it's a weird kind of like quirky story for us. So it was definitely, it was exciting. So I wanted to let Sarah sort of talk about the process and how that was for her, and then also maybe talk a little bit about The Directors itself.
Yeah, so we had Dario Altieri with I'm probably going to mess up all their names, but Dario Altieri with Wistar and Nicholas Petrelli with Christiana Care. And basically the two of them, they've been longtime partners when it comes to basically merging a kind of cancer research focused NCI designated cancer center with a place that's very focused on clinical care. So trying to take a place where they excel at basic science research, and then a place that excels at taking care of patients, and how do we kind of merge them together to kind of create something, bigger than, them separately. So there's a bit of change that's happening because Dario is stepping down by the end of the year, but they seem like they've really kind of hardwired the system, and that they've built a system that can kind of sustain itself no matter what the leadership is, as they said in the interview. But yeah, I mean, it seemed like really the big thing is that they've been able to kind of cut a lot of the red tape. things that maybe would take like 5 to 10 different approvals, might take months and months. I mean, there are many examples in which Nicholas was like, yeah, I just called Dario up and he said, sounds good. And then it was done within 15 minutes, whether that was, getting funding for, 1,000 more patients to kind of really verify and validate the results of a study. Just kind of the normal bureaucracy of academic research. It seems like they've created a model in some ways that's been able to counteract that.
Yeah. That was and it was so cool. You could tell that they've worked together for 15 years without red tape, in the conversation. It was just fun and easy. And I don't know. And it's cool. Like, I feel like I think of Wistar as just such a powerhouse, and obviously Christiana Care as well. And there was a little bit of a conversation about the challenges that they face trying to apply for NCI designation as a consortium together, because like you said, they have sort of these complementary strengths that are often found in kind of related consortia structures, but that they faced a lot of sort of challenges and continue to.
Yeah, those were definitely a lot of the questions that Paul asked, was wondering about, like, hey, how about NCI consortia designation? What's going on with that? Yeah. And it seems like it's something that Christiana Care is interested in, but it isn't the main priority. I mean, at the end of the day, they're focused on taking care of patients and finding the next treatments and cure to cancer. And if NCI consortia designation comes along and it kind of boosts them, then that's great. But it might be like a secondary or tertiary kind of priority for them.
Yeah. They have what they need, right? Like, they have sort of that basic stuff and the clinical stuff, and together they got it going on. That's awesome. Okay, that's great. Thank you for, well, actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to go a little bit deeper. I did wanted to say, I just wanted to ask about the writing side of it. Like, I know it's maybe a little bit vulnerable to talk about it on a podcast, but I just wanted to know if, like, I guess I'm also thinking sort of broader in terms of just like you stepping up and you like really coming to your own as a reporter. I feel like it's just been really nice to see. So maybe I'm just kind of trying to be like, yay, Sarah.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, it kind of reminded me a lot of my experience as a radio reporter and producer. That's my background. Because a lot of it, of being a radio reporter, is just kind of listening to tape all the time and then picking out the best pieces and really, taking something and then creating a better version of it. A better version is maybe not the right word, but like a more succinct version, a more listenable version, the cliff notes, essentially, picking out the best pieces so that we're not wasting people's time with all of the kind of, little minutia or the ums and the, stumbling over our words, like I may or may not be doing during this podcast right now.
I was literally thinking the same thing for myself.
Yeah. It just kind of fit on like a glove.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it definitely showed. I like opened your first draft and I was like, perfect. Like, that's it. So it was fun to do that. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, and
we
then
we should have a section during every podcast that we do where you just shower me with compliments. So
that's like my favorite thing to do in life. So definitely can be arranged.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a lovely transition to sort of early onset cancer topic. So like I said in the headlines, this has sort of been in our awareness, like it's been on the rise. Early onset cancer in general has been on the rise, but early onset colorectal cancer obviously has been on the rise at a much higher rate than the other like early onset cancers or cancers in younger people. There's different sort of definitions depending on who you're talking to and the cancer type. I've sort of covered ACS and how they've reported on this trend over the last couple of years. And it was cool to have to be able to pass it off to Sarah and, work together on like what is actually new here. And I mean, I feel like there were two big things. The main one, not to steal your thunder, but it's in the headline is the colorectal cancer is now the leading cause of cancer death in patients under 50. I'm excited to kind of talk about each individual one, but I will let Sarah talk about the sort of really interesting detail of her story that she found with the ACS thing.
Yeah, ACS has kind of been on it with multiple publications related to colorectal cancer in people under 50. Actually, the story incorporates two publications, but really the focus is about how colorectal cancer is the leading cause of cancer death and that it's been rising 1.1% annually since 2005 for people under 50. And that's kind of a big shift, or there's a big contrast when you compare that to other types of cancer deaths, such as brain cancer, breast cancer, leukemia, lung cancer. All of those have been pretty much flat or trending downwards. And so to see colorectal cancer as this outlier, when in general, deaths, maybe not incidence, but deaths are declining, raises a lot of question marks. And so naturally, when I was interviewing one of the epidemiologists, I was like, why is this happening? And he's like, well, that's the question that we're wondering. And there are not a ton of great answers at this moment, which makes sense, to establish causation is very difficult. But there's a couple of risk factors that are of interest or suspected, obesity being one of them, diet being another one. In the publication, there was actually, mention of research into microplastics and into ultra processed foods and antibiotics. Not saying necessarily that is the cause or those are the defined risk factors, but these are some of the questions that researchers are asking themselves to really kind of pinpoint the drivers behind this phenomenon right now.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I mean, and I forget exactly when I covered it, but it was several years ago. And like you're saying, I'm not sort of expecting that they're going to have answers yet, but I am like more as an individual, I think, than a reporter being like, what is going on? Like, what is happening? And
as somebody who's under 50 too, I'm like, what's going on?
Yeah. Like, why is this? And it's weird because, when I think of like, sort of, I mean, with colorectal cancer, I think it's hard to separate sort of, again, as more of just a lay person, the idea of that cancer type with diet, just because it's so related, and like you're saying, these other cancers are going down, or mortality is going down in people under 50. Definitely something I think I'm struggling with as a reporter on that. And I'm really like hawk-eyed waiting for someone to have some answers, like I cannot wait till we understand this, because when it's such a distinct phenomenon like this, like again, lay opinion, but there has to be like almost like an answer, like when it's just such a specific phenomenon happening. So that's definitely something I was desperately hoping that might be this year, but not this year.
So that's definitely the more squishy part of the story. I think what was more defined while I was interviewing people that are kind of steeped in this world is, okay, we don't have a lot of answers, but what we do know, what is evidence-based, is CRC screenings. And so actually in 2021, the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force, they lowered the age for recommended screenings to 45 years old. So, it's 2026 now. Maybe we finally have like a little bit of a sense as to what happened after that policy change. So according to a study published in the Journal of the NCI, they found that the rates of CRC screenings for people under 50 are pretty low. Only 22.5% of respondents reported any form of colorectal cancer testing. So that could be colonoscopy, that could be a fecal occult blood test, that could be multi-targeted stool DNA testing. And this is pretty much just since the update. So 22.5% is not nearly, I think, where most oncologists hope it would be.
Yeah. I mean, I remember this in your story. For people over 50, it's like 72%, right?
Yeah, it's 70. Yeah. Exactly. I'm actually looking at it right now. In 2021, the age, the rate for people 50 to 75 was 72%. So there's a pretty big gap.
Yeah, and it's so weird because we have to like remember where we're coming from. Like we are so steeped in this, but even then, I feel like I've seen it in, like lay publications. I was really surprised by that, personally. Like I thought that, again, like you're saying, like being a person under 50, I was like, if the recommended screenings went down, I would be all over that, like and I maybe that's like a follow-up story, honestly, is like really digging into like what's happening. Because I'm sure that there are, outreach people who are looking at this and being like, how do we actually get people to follow these recommendations that could help improve survival? So
yeah. And I was actually thinking recently, and my brother might hate me for this, but my brother is not 45, but like inching closer to there. And so I was like, do I just be that annoying family member where I'm like, you got to get on your cancer screenings? And in some ways I'm a little nervous because I'm calling him out as an aging person who's growing in age, and to be reminded of the fact that, there are things out there that could get you. Maybe is
Mm-hmm.
one reason behind the resistance, just
Yeah.
not wanting to admit like, hey, my body is aging and,
Yeah.
there are risks involved with that. And so I should be on top of my health.
That is such a good point, Sarah, because I never really thought about the fact that, like 50 is sort of this like generally accepted age of like not, I don't want to say it because I feel like being a almost 30-year-old and there's a lot of sort of ageism that might be coming out, but I really don't mean it that way. I just mean that like, I feel like people are like 50 is kind of like over the hill, or that you're like starting to look toward the real second half of your life. And I honestly, I don't think that, or I do think that colonoscopy screenings and sort of like this sort of marker, right? Because colonoscopy is not like a blood test. You know what I mean? Like a colonoscopy is a pretty
It's not
intense,
fun.
It's not fun.
Yeah, it's not fun.
And I feel like it's sort of in this general consciousness that it's like people are like approaching their colonoscopy age. And so, yeah, I think that there's something interesting there, like sociologically almost, of that sort of age going down to 45, where I feel like a lot of people, especially now, people having children later, et cetera, 45 still feels young, like really young. You know what I mean? And so that's definitely, we'll figure it out for ACS. We got it. We'll figure out why it's happening. Okay. Is there anything else about that story that you wanted to touch on before we sort of switch over?
I think people should just read it. That's it.
Heck yeah. Awesome. Okay. And then, so yeah, the other two are, I'm going to sort of just summarize them, and maybe Sarah, if you have like additional thoughts. I just wanted to, because again, because we've been reporting on this for a while, I feel like it's just really exciting when we have sort of a new angle, new news coming out of this space. So Kimran Rathmel, former director of NCI, and now she's at the Ohio State University James as CEO and then also director of the Cancer Center. She did a Q&A with Sarah Myers and John Alexander, who are co-directors of the Bridge program at the OSU CCC James. The Bridge program stands for Building Research, Innovation, and Care Delivery for Groups with Early-onset Cancer. So it's like very specific to that. And it was just a really, really cool conversation to hear very specifically how they are addressing the needs of these patients. The one that stood out to me the most, and that I'm going to talk about, and I think maybe, Sarah, you might have some thoughts, because was really informed by our coverage of oncofertility, right? Like we've talked about, we've written about, the tragedies that can come from a lack of awareness of the needs of oncofertility care for early onset or just generally young patients. And the Bridge program, it seems really wonderful because everybody in the Bridge program like knows, like any young person, you need oncofertility care. Like it's a program that's like designed to care for these people. And I think, again, being informed by our coverage of oncofertility, where it's more of just like not ignorance, but just not being aware, not being prepared for these patients. Seeing that is just a really cool model, I feel, for, this, again, unfortunately, like rising trend.
Yeah, just oncofertility in general is usually like at the bottom of the list. But in some ways, I'm wondering if this symbolizes or signifies big institutional cancer centers really paying attention to this issue of young people having cancer. Because, generally, if you need oncofertility counseling, it's because you're on the younger side.
Yeah.
And so, I wonder if there are conversations, at the top of leadership at different cancer centers that are saying, how do we really support for this growing group of patients?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to have Rathmel be leading that charge, like people should be listening.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was a guest editorial or Trials and Tribulations article by Richard Goldberg. And he just had and for my like science nerd brain, this was such a it scratched an itch for me for sure. But he talked about the fact that, and again, it was in sort of the context of the early onset colorectal cancer, because these patients have, depending on the stage at diagnosis and other factors, they have a pretty standard course of treatment involving surgery and chemo and radiation. Sometimes I'm not a clinician, but there's sort of this process specifically with surgery. But then oftentimes the cancer, even if it becomes, in remission, it oftentimes comes back. And if that is the case, or if, it just doesn't work for a patient, there's really not good like secondary therapies. And if they are available, they're very toxic. Patients are sacrificing, like quality of life for quantity of life. And in most cases, it's very little quantity. It's on the order of months. So with that sort of thought process, Goldberg talked about immunotherapy as a potential way forward. And obviously, there's a lot of really interesting, things to say about that. Remember our story, Sarah? He mentioned the microsatellite stable versus microsatellite unstable disease, and how for the tiny percentage of people, was like 5% of people, right? Who have this mutation, immunotherapy does work incredibly well for those patients. But obviously, again, only 95%. So as immunotherapy researchers are trying to broaden the impact of these therapies on people, on patients, he basically was talking about some really cool nitty-gritty regulatory stuff that I always love. But it was just really interesting. Basically, and again, maybe a lot of our listeners will be familiar with this this phenomenon, but basically immunotherapy is different from chemotherapy or traditional chemotherapies in that the response rate is not necessarily a good predictor of actual benefit to the patient. Because in chemotherapy response rate, it's the chemotherapy is working, the tumor is shrinking, it's sort of linear, it makes a lot of sense. But with immunotherapy, it's not so straightforward. And in fact, what's happening is that after immunotherapy, immune cells, other healthy immune cells, flood to the tumor to do their work of ultimately, hopefully killing it. And that actually can appear as the opposite of, I don't know if it's technically can appear as like progression. I don't want to go that far, but tumors can look bigger, and it can look like, the tumors are not responding, even though they might be. So that was just such an interesting little sort of like niche topic within the early onset, honestly, early onset cancers, and more broadly than even just early onset, but just the immunotherapy world, sort of this intersection was really interesting to see, like, really have to be thinking really critically and really, in a nuanced way when it comes to problem. So that was really cool. I like it.
That's very counterintuitive. And I'm just wondering about the researchers that conducted any of the research that underlies this. Were they seeing how their patients reacted and thinking, wow, this is really not helping at all? And kind of holding their breath for a while, and then just suddenly being like, wait, what's happening? Wait, they're actually getting better? And that being just a moment in which, maybe this trial was heading in a certain direction, but then totally did it in about face. And then something was learned in that moment. So, I'm just wondering what it was like for them.
Oh my gosh, another story idea in the books, because that does sound like a really interesting, like, narrative, like you're saying, like, on a personal level, were they shocked? Were they like, oh my gosh? But I don't know. And I feel like if I really search my memory, I might have more details, but it's going to take too long. It's definitely not worth it. So I'll do some research. Maybe we'll do some reporting, and it could be a cool avenue, but awesome. Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for also letting me nerd out about all my little facets of early onset oncology. I thought it was very, very interesting to finally have some like real meat to talk about rather than just like incidence and mortality. So
yeah. Well, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. I probably won't see you next week, but I will see you, as in the listeners, next week. I will be on the podcast again moving forward. Sarah and Claire really stepped up and gave me a break for the last 2 weeks. So I am rejuvenated and ready to keep chatting with y'all. So thank you very much, and I will see you next week.
Bye.
Before you go, we've got a favor to ask. The Cancer Letter podcast has been nominated for a People's Voice Award at the Webby Awards, and this one is completely decided by listeners. If this podcast has informed you, supported you, or meant anything to you at all, please just take a moment to vote. The link is right in the show notes, and if you really want to help, can you send it to just one person who cares about cancer reporting and patient stories? We don't say this lightly. This could genuinely help us grow and reach more people who need this information. Thank you so much.